All right, let's talk about one of the biggest mysteries in the entire working world, your salary. You ever get the feeling that that number on your paycheck was just pulled out of thin air? Well, you might be surprised to learn there's a whole detailed blueprint behind it. Let's dive in and see how it's actually built.
So, really, how is that number decided? Is it about how good you are at your job, what the market is paying, or just how well you can negotiate? Well, the truth is, it's kind of all of the above. But all those things fit into a much, much bigger and more structured plan than you'd probably guess.
You know, the best way to think about how a company pays people is to imagine an architectural blueprint. It's not random at all. It's this carefully designed plan that's meant to make sure every single salary is fair, it's competitive, and it's legally sound. This blueprint, it's the foundation for everything.
So where does a company even start with this blueprint? Well, it all kicks off with one single, really fundamental choice. How do we want to stack up against everyone else in the job market? This one decision, to either lag, match, or lead, it sets the tone for everything that follows.
And it really just boils down to these three core strategies. A company can choose to lag the market, which means paying a bit less than their competitors. They can match the market, which is aiming right for the middle of the pack, that's the 50th percentile. Or they can decide to lead the market, which means paying top dollar, to attract and keep the absolute best talent out there.
This choice is really about where the company decides it wants to plant its flag compared to the competition. Are they going to stand right alongside them, get out ahead of them, or hang back a little? And this isn't just about the budget, it's a huge strategic statement about what the company values and how it plans to keep its people. Okay, so once that philosophy is locked in, how does it actually turn into a real salary for a specific job? This is where we get into the nitty-gritty of the blueprint itself. The compensation pros, think of them as the architects of the pay structure. They get to work.
Now, the process can get pretty detailed, but it really breaks down into 4 key phases. First, companies gather just mountains of data from all sorts of salary surveys. Second, they benchmark their own jobs against what the market's doing, and they're comparing actual responsibilities, not just job titles. Third, similar jobs get grouped together into pay grades. And finally, they analyze all that data to build out the actual salary ranges for each grade.
Now, here's a super important point, and it's a really common thing people get wrong. If a company decides to target, let's say, the 50th percentile of the market, that number isn't the maximum you can earn, not at all. It becomes the midpoint, that solid anchor right in the middle of the salary range for that job.
So from that midpoint anchor, the rest of the range gets built. A pretty common way to do it is to set the minimum salary at about 80% of that midpoint, and the maximum at 120%. This creates this nice logical spread that allows for salary growth. As you get more experience in the role, you can move from being a new hire all the way to a seasoned expert within that range.
So how do companies make sure all these different pay ranges actually line up and make sense together? Well, this is where the math gets fun. They plot the market midpoint for every single pay grade, which gives you all those little dots you see. The goal is to then find a single line of best fit that shows the overall pay progression across the entire company.
But pay progression isn't always a perfect straight line. A lot of the time, a curved line, like you see here, is actually a much better fit for the data. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. The pay jumps between senior-level jobs are usually way bigger than the jumps between junior-level jobs. This kind of modeling just makes sure the structure reflects how the market really works. Okay, so after all that design work is done, you get this, the final report card. This report compares every single current employee's salary to the brand new structure. The key metric to look at is the Compa-Ratio, that number in the last column. It's just your salary divided by the midpoint of your range. A ratio below 1 means you're in the bottom half of the range. A ratio above 1 means you're in the top half. This instantly shows where potential pay gaps are and helps figure out the cost of getting everyone's pay into alignment.
But a salary is never ever just a number on a spreadsheet, right? It's a message, and how an employee interprets that message is just as important, if not more important, than all the math that went into it. And this brings us to the really fascinating psychology of pay.
Researchers have a name for this. They call it pay attribution. And it's not about what the company says its intentions are. It's about the reason an employee believes they're paid what they are. It's the story they tell themselves to answer the question, why is my salary what it is?
And generally, those beliefs fall into 2 big buckets. There's the commitment-focused view, where you feel like the company pays you this way because they're investing in you for the long haul. And then there's the control-focused view, where you feel like the company is really just trying to minimize its costs,
get the most work out of you for the least amount of money.
And this is where it gets so powerful, because that perceived intent, it matters a lot. As this quote from the research points out, we judge things based on why we think they happened. You could have two employees earning the exact same salary, but if one feels it's a supportive investment and the other feels it's an exploitative minimum, their motivation and their loyalty are going to be worlds apart.
And this perception has very real consequences. When employees see their pay as being commitment-focused, they report way higher levels of what's called perceived organizational support. To put it simply, they feel more valued, they feel more supported by the company, and they feel personally connected to its success.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? How do we connect that technical salary blueprint with this really critical human psychology? Well, it all comes down to understanding the real goal of building a pay structure in the first place.
A well-designed salary structure isn't the end goal. It's the foundation. That methodical, mathematical blueprint is what gives a company a solid base to stand on so they can communicate their intentions, prove that they're being fair, and ultimately build trust with their people.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? You simply can't have meaningful pay transparency without a solid, logical plan behind it all. And without that transparency, it's pretty much impossible to build an engaged, high-performing team. The structure makes the trust possible, and that trust is what fuels performance.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Now that you understand the mechanics and the psychology behind your salary, think about your own job. Does your company's approach feel more like a commitment to you or an attempt to control you? The answer to that question really says everything about the foundation of trust where you work. Thanks for tuning in.